Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest Tory plot, which I did say would now be unleashed as soon as Sunak ruled out the May 2nd election. We are supposed to believe that the far right want to back a compromise candidate in Penny Mordaunt in order to replace Sunak and improve their chances in the election. In reality, although Mordaunt may be a useful idiot for them, the idea that the far right would back her seems very unlikely. So what is going on? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, as I've already said, although some in the Conservative Party think it's too late to replace Sunak before the election now, it's clearly not. They replaced Theresa May later in the year than this and still won the election. Whether it's a good idea this time is more of a genuine debate. Some figures like Jacob Rees-Mogg and David Davis have been coming out to publicly trash the idea. They think it would be lunacy. Under most circumstances, absolutely it would be. But I think it was lunacy to keep pushing a failing strategy on asylum whilst failing to do anything about the cost of living crisis as the government were approaching an election. But they did it anyway. So lunacy is clearly not off the table for this lot. And so now that Sunak has given his strongest sign yet that the general election really will be in the autumn, which I discussed in a bit more detail on the stream last night, the rebels may be seeing their final chance to replace him. This potentially last-ditched attempt is called the contract with Britain. In reality, when you read the details of this alleged plot, it's actually a contract with the Tory party. As reported, we're being led to believe that the far right are holding discussions with moderates to vote against Sunak. You know, should a confidence vote emerge, that is. And then rather than have a damaging leadership contest, simply go, no, that'd be mad. We don't want that. We'll simply all back Penny Mordaunt as the automatic successor. No fuss, all done in an afternoon, an instant swap to limit the look of crazy to the public. However, if reports are to be believed, the deal would not actually make Penny Mordaunt the head of government. She'd be a puppet. She would have to, the term was used, subcontract out all social policy to others. And you would not need too many guesses to work out who they want that social policy subcontracting out to. This is, of course, insane. And it's insane for two reasons. The first is that Mordaunt would get to play at being Prime Minister, and maybe that's enough for her, but she would have no control over her own government's policy, and yet would have to publicly go along with it as if she were the one deciding. Now, maybe she's fine with that. We know she likes a bit of cosplay. But what about the moderates? This would basically be a deal which has policy decided by the far right. In return for what? The pretense that someone who is a little bit more socially liberal is in charge but isn't really? I don't see the benefit to Tory MPs who are a bit more moderate. The second issue is this. So let's imagine this went through as being reported. What's to stop such, like Penny Mordaunt say, let's say she becomes Prime Minister then. What's to stop her reneging? She would be the Prime Minister. She would have the power to set the government's agenda and make ministerial appointments. No agreement that they get from her, even in writing, would change that. You can't, with a written contract, change the constitution of the country. So what would the far right do then? I mean, what would they do? Are they going to blow up in public and go, oh, she said she would do this? That just makes them even more likely to lose their seats. And they would not be able to replace her because she would then be protected by party rules on confidence votes unless they can get an overwhelming majority of or at least a clear majority of the party wanting a fifth leader inside the space of a single parliament. And as for voting against her legislation, yeah, they could try and hold that over her. What legislation? There isn't really anything passing through Parliament these days. Rishi Sunak talks about, we've got a lot to get done. That's why we're not having an election early. There's still lots to do. There's nothing happening. You look at the parliamentary schedule. There's nothing going on. Nothing taking place. We've just had a budget, for goodness sake. Nothing's happening. No votes are taking place. All that's happening, there's just waiting for the Rwanda bill. After that, there's nothing. If Mordaunt did replace Sunak, all she could realistically do is change the direction of the coming manifesto, make a few more positive sounding mini budget statements in September and then call the election for October. Far too late to introduce any significant or certainly controversial legislation now. There's just not enough time. We've got the Easter recess coming up, then they come back for a bit and then they're getting ready for summer and then there's no time. So even the plot as reported is off the wall. It invites both major wings of the party to trust one another that they won't abuse the terms of this alleged agreement without any fail-safes at all. I know I think Tory MPs are a bit dim, but my goodness. But that's the deal as reported. In reality, I don't even see how this possibly works in practice to the benefit of both wings of the party, which would surely need to work together to bring this about without imploding their own party. But I'm not the only one. The front page of the Sunday Telegraph carries the headline, "Mordaunt is stalking horse for right-wing Tory rival." The idea is that the far right are attempting to play the moderates by saying they will back Mordaunt in return for a few sweeties, but that as soon as Sunak is brought down in a confidence vote, instead of backing Mordaunt, they're going to go, no, actually, we want this candidate now. They will then challenge the rest of the party, either accept our choice or go through the chaos of another painfully divisive leadership contest that risks destroying the party completely at the election. Then the so-called moderate wing of the party will have been well and truly played by some of their thickest colleagues. Embarrassing. And if you're wondering why the far right would pretend to back Mordaunt, it's because although she is quite far right economically, she's very Brexity, definitely ERG, she's also socially more tolerant than most Tories, so they think that, the moderate wing would back her. Oh, and she held a sword. They like that. But also, Mordaunt has a decent level of support in the parliamentary party and clearly desperately wants to be Prime Minister. She's a soft touch. The far-right media are also doing their bit, with Christopher Hope saying that he's been told by Labour shadow ministers privately that Mordaunt is the leader Labour fears the most. In reality, Hope is always making up pretend briefings from supposedly senior MPs in order to browbeat the Tories into doing something stupid. But what he's doing here is trying to persuade some wavering Tory MPs that Labour may not handle Mordaunt as well as Sunak. Now, I've seen reports that her allies are saying that she's not interested in this plot, that she wants a crack at the job, absolutely, she's making no secret of her leadership ambitions, but after the election, after Sunak stands down, absolute rubbish for two reasons. First, she would not be Prime Minister. If the results are really bad, she might not even be leader of the opposition. But if the Tories are still in second place, say, she would have that most unenviable of poison chalices, being leader of the opposition after an election drubbing, which means every time she opens her mouth, the majority of MPs will be laughing at her. Second, Mordaunt is very likely to lose her seat in the election. Unless she fancies playing a very long game and trying to come back to Parliament after a few years in the wilderness, this is her last chance. So I am prepared to believe that despite public appearances, Mordaunt would be very interested in this deal. She might even be prepared to hand over policy making to others just so she can pretend to be Prime Minister, just like she made herself a pretend captain when she was Defence Secretary. But she'd have to be mighty dim if she thinks the far right would stick to the terms of this deal. And the far right would have to be mighty dim if they do and believe she will stick to the terms herself. The entire plot hinges on deeply dishonest people trusting one another. In fact, if the Sunday Telegraph had been quite so open about the fairly obvious underplot from the far right, then even more sort of limited, shall we say, Tory MPs will have at least read that and be thinking about it. Frankly, any Tory MP who is not part of the swivel-eyed loon brigade would be mad to go along with this. I can see how they might imagine that replacing the leader in a tidy way is worth a shot. Right now, winning 100 seats would look like a good result. And even that means the vast majority of them losing their seats. So sure, I can see how a distinct majority of them would get desperate and think maybe replacing Sunak can't make it any worse. But this alleged plot just has so many red flags about it. It would tell me that if Sunak is replaced at all, it will not be cleanly. And perhaps most Tory MPs realise this already. Maybe that's why Sunak feels confident going as long as is needed for his precious India trade deal. If he'd got agreement from Modi last week, which he was pushing very hard for, I am certain he would be calling that election for May the 2nd. That's why, we're now hearing that he's had to give up until later in the year. And that makes me think, yeah, actually, that could now happen. Because if Sunak is confident that his MPs are not going to try and depose him for fear of this really obviously duplicitous plot from the far right, then, Sunak will feel safe. I just think any Tory MPs outside of the far right falling for this would be very unlikely. If they did, I mean, get the popcorn ready just in case, but if they did, I'd have to revise my opinion of their cognitive abilities down even further, and I already have a fairly uncharitable view of them. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.